Hey, everybody. John Odermatt, host of Felony Friday, here coming to you real quick pre-show to talk to you about a very cool opportunity. You've probably heard about it maybe earlier this week. Mark had Mikkel Thorup on a special bonus show to talk about this great summit coming up, online summit called Offshore Escape 2020, brought to you by Mikkel Thorup. And it has tons of great speakers, Bobby Casey, John Perkins, who has been on Mark's program, and Mark is presenting too. He's going to be presenting about everything that he's learned from interviewing hundreds and hundreds of free thinkers. It's a great opportunity to learn and to grow and to just dip your toe in the water to see if becoming an escape artist is right for you. The ticket is free. You can register. The only way you access it is by registering, and you can do that by going to lionsofliberty.com/escape. All right, hope to see you there.
Welcome to Felony Friday, a presentation of the Lions of Liberty podcast. Here is your host, John Odermatt.
All right, welcome back to Felony Friday. Today, we got a special episode. We've done one of these before. What this is one of our Nittany episodes where if you are a Lions of Pride member and you contribute up to the Nittany level, which is $50 a month or above, you get to basically produce, we take your idea, what you want to do, and build an episode around that. And today is Tyler Colford. He's our Nittany supporter. It's his episode, so I'm joined by Tyler. Welcome to Felony Friday, man.
Hey, thank you, John. It's great being here.
Yeah, great to have you here. And Tyler wants to build this episode around freeing Ross Ulbricht. And I'm going to have an interview in a little bit with Lynn Ulbricht, Ross's mom. Lynn has been on the show before. Lynn is, just a great lady. She's very active, not only in activism for looking for a pardon or clemency or a commutation for her son Ross, but also just criminal justice reform in general. And Tyler has taken his passion for freeing Ross one step farther and written a song about it. And we're going to play that song a little bit later, but I kind of wanted to start this episode out by having Tyler tell you guys, why he's so passionate about criminal justice reform and why he's particularly so passionate about freeing Ross Ulbricht.
Oh, is that my...
That's where I turn it over to you. That's when you talk.
All right, great. Well, thank you. I heard about Ross. I want to say it was like 5 or 6 years ago, and wasn't too aware of like what had actually happened. But I had heard of like the Silk Road, and I heard about Ross. I think I was listening to Free Talk Live at the time, and I was just like, man, that it's crazy, but I didn't really think anything of it. And this past just last year, June, Lynn was talking at Pork Fest, and like I had remembered hearing about Ross's situation, and I was just like, man, like he got such a bum like deal. It's so crazy, like nonviolent, like victimless crime. Really, like the Silk Road was it actually fulfilled people's wants and needs. Like the only reason why it's illegal is because of other people's moral judgments. But yeah, so I was moved by seeing Lynn, and at the time, like I didn't have enough money to like put towards the auctions that were going on, and I figured that I could turn one of my songs into something that will perpetually give to to freeing Ross and other nonviolent victimless criminals.
So right then at PorkFest, that's when you got the idea to write the song, or
not write the song. I was already, so I had listened to Bob Murphy's chaos theory essay, and that really like sunk in, like how the free market can really handle the criminal aspect and the justice aspect of our society. And I touched upon like victimless crime. So, you know, if there's no victim, there's no crime. And I started writing this. I hadn't recorded it or anything at this time when I was at PorkFest, but I had begun writing it, and I had something ready to basically record. But it was all for justice reform, victimless crimes, basically like a private type retribution instead of or restitution instead of like prosecution type aspect. So everything that I was talking about really fell in line with what happened with Ross Ulbricht, and I was like, it was the perfect and it just aligned perfectly. And I was like, you know, I live in an apartment, but I can still like figure out some way to give back to or put something into a good cause, and freeing Ross is definitely a good cause. He's got a lot of like wealth and value to give back to the community. He's still doing it with his articles on Medium and stuff, but it'd be so much more if he was free.
Absolutely. And so the way this is going to work is I'm going to bring Lynn on, do an interview with Lynn, and have some questions. Actually, we're going to talk about some things that really I haven't heard Lynn talk about too much. You know, how really faith has helped her and Ross to get through this, really their entire family, and how Ross really has, you know, used gratitude and forgiveness to not even hold a grudge against the judge that locked him up in order to kind of rise above it. So some pretty interesting stuff. We'll have the interview, and then we'll play Tyler's song, and then I'll bring Tyler back on. So here's the interview with Lyn Ulbricht. My guest today on Felony Friday is Lyn Ulbricht. Lynn is, of course, the mother of Ross Ulbricht, and Ross is, in case you've been living under a rock and you didn't follow the case, Ross was the creator of the black marketplace, Silk Road. He's now in prison for life, and Lynn has been on the road, very active in the libertarian community and outside of it. Criminal justice, I guess the criminal justice reform community in general, speaking out about her son's injustice. And, you know, there's been a petition circulating around that I think has a few 100,000 signatures on it to get
it's pushing 300,000
to get a pardon for
I
Ross.
can look it up right now. Sorry, I should have known.
And that's
right
Lynn
away
there. So,
what it was
Lynn,
today,
welcome to Felony Friday. Welcome back, I should say.
Thank you. It's so great to be back. Yeah, and talk to you. I really enjoyed last time. But I'm booting up the petition because every day it grows. We're 292,543. So that's, and then when I watch it, the numbers go up as I'm watching, which is always fun for me. It's like, oh, wow, somebody signed an hour ago. Somebody signed 10 minutes ago. And it's just been growing. So we're almost to 300.
What's the easiest way for people to find the petition?
FreeRoss.org has a banner. You click, it goes straight to it. It's on change.org on the internet. Or you can just go to freeross.org/petition. We'll also go straight to it. And, you know, really, I just like to say to people, you don't need to know every detail of the case. You don't have to think Ross is a good person. You don't have to agree with it. what all you have to do to sign the petition is, if you believe that it is wrong and excessive, and to give a nonviolent first-time offender double life plus 40 years without parole, essentially death in prison, then that's all we're asking, is to commute the sentence. Not that he did nothing wrong, not that Ross doesn't regret it, not that, all of that. Or does that warrant that kind of excessive sentence?
Mm-hmm. And just on that point there, because I know that there's confusion around him being a nonviolent offender. Because I bring this case up to people all the time, and maybe you can probably state this more clearly than I can about what he was actually charged with and convicted of. But there's, if you Google Ross Ulbricht, you Google Silk Road, you get articles saying that he's implicated in a murder for hire. So can you just put some clarity around that? How did that get attached, or that incorrect assumption get attached to his case?
Well, yeah, it was the prosecutors who did it. It first came out, it was an ambush at our bail hearing, or Ross's bail hearing, because lawyers didn't know anything about it. And they came out at the bail hearing and said, oh no, he arranged murders. And, it was like, what? And
so that was the first time.
Headline.
Was that the first time that you'd ever heard of something like that?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Well, no, I think the media, let me think about this. It seems like I did hear about it before, but I guess that was the official, or it wasn't even official. It was just said at the bail hearing. So I believe that was the first time that, the media really got that and ran with it. And then 2 months later, it wasn't in the indictment. It wasn't charged at trial. Mm-hmm. They didn't charge him with it. They were permitted to talk about it to the jury. It said, oh, there were no murders. We're not asking you to rule on it, but just trust us, he did it. Now, we objected. The defense filed a motion objecting this because it prejudices the jury. But the judge, didn't accept that. So, and later she used the murder for hire as to basically a basis, or not a basis, but to bolster her draconian sentence, saying, well, he did it. I think he did it. Now, this is a violation of the Sixth Amendment, and it was brought all the way, this exact thing was brought all the way to the Supreme Court, because the Sixth Amendment was written to protect the accused of a rogue judge deciding that she knows better than a jury, and that so no jury is required. And this is the Sixth Amendment guarantees a jury of one's peers, 12 people, not one judge who decides to believe the prosecutors. And it was argued and supported by our cert petition to the Supreme Court was supported by 21 different organizations across the political spectrum, but they didn't take it. Now there was another charge. There was an actual charge. It never was prosecuted, and it never went to trial in Maryland, based on the material of two agents, federal agents, who claimed they had these anonymous chats were Ross. It was never proven to be Ross. They were all anonymous chats. And these agents are now in prison for corruption. And so there's that. And Ross has always denied this. His life history shows how peaceful and nonviolent he is, including in prison, where he put his own life in danger because he refused to assault another inmate that he was being pressured to do. And so that made him a target. And he had to go into protective custody, which was an 8x10 metal box, for 3.5 months until he could be moved to a safer place for people who are targeted, because he refused to assault someone. But in any case, the Maryland, this was in Maryland, the other indictment, it was based on material from these corrupt agents. And the alleged victim, Curtis Green, has come out publicly many times saying he doesn't think it was Ross. He's a high-level administrator on Silk Road, and that he supports Ross's freedom, totally supports it, and so does his wife. He doesn't believe it was Ross.
So these two agents, the corruption that they were convicted of, it's from the case, right? Didn't they steal Bitcoin?
Oh yeah, they stole a lot of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember the exact amount. Maybe 20,000 of them or something like that. I'm not sure exactly, but it was, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars worth. And
that wasn't allowed to be brought up because that was known. That was known at the time, right?
The prosecution knew about these two agents.
Mm-hmm.
The judge, they only told the judge about one of them, Carl Force. Sean Bridges, they didn't even tell the judge. But the judge allowed them to keep it out of trial that there was, this corruption. It wasn't only that they were stealing. They had the ability and unfettered access to do anything pretty much they wanted on the site, including act as Dread Pirate Roberts without whoever that was knowing, and other aliases, and change chats, content. They had keys, they had passwords. They had the keys to the kingdom, essentially. And this was not permitted to be known to the jury. Their existence wasn't permitted to be known to the jury.
And a lot of people, I think in the mainstream media who don't know a lot about this case, people who just maybe read the headlines, right. They think that Ross was the only Dread Pirate Roberts, the only DPR, and they have no clue that federal agents had access to be able to act as DPR, which opens up who knows what happened? I guess we'll really never know, how much they were doing and what kind of influence they were wielding. It's something that was interesting. I was talking to you pre-show about your interview on the Babylon Bee, which I highly recommend everyone check out. It's a great interview.
Yeah, they're great.
First time I've ever listened to their podcast.
Thanks,
I love their
their whole thing is good.
I love their work, their articles and everything they post. I see it on Facebook.
I laugh every day when I read I get it in my box.
It is hilarious stuff. But they're also very very good interviewers, and I thought it was great, great interview. So encourage everyone to check that out. To circle back, and I think I don't remember exactly what I was going to ask, but one thing that came up is that you had no idea that Ross was involved. You had no idea that Silk Road existed or he was involved with it or anything until you saw a news report on it, right? That he had been arrested.
Yeah. Well, Reuters called us up, and so a reporter from Reuters somehow got our number and started telling us all of this stuff about Ross has been arrested, and see, that's when I think I first heard about this murder for hire. But God, I'm getting confused, to be honest. I know that our lawyer felt ambushed at the bail hearing, but anyway, I was like, this is insane. Ross, this doesn't fit. And then I turn on the TV and George Stephanopoulos is going, they got their man. They got him. He's guilty. And I'm like, wow, don't we get trials? Aren't we innocent until proven guilty? And then the neighbors started, freaking out because media is driving by, knocking on our door, emails pouring. It all just became an avalanche all of a sudden. And my life has never been the same since that moment.
Believe that.
It's pretty crazy.
So Ross was living in California at that time, right?
Yes.
And you were, I know you're in Arizona now. Were you?
It was Austin, Texas. We lived in Austin.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what was he? I forget. What was he doing career-wise at that time?
He took a path. He originally he had gotten his master's degree at Penn State in material science. Right there. Yeah, I was noticing you had your Penn State shirt, and he, was on his way. He got a scholarship to Cornell in material science, and he was on his way to there, and he got very involved with the Ron Paul campaign, very turned on and, passionate about freedom and free markets, and decided, and Austrian economics and all of that, and just said, it's not my passion anymore. I can't go on I can't do it. I can't go on to pursue material science. And of course, I, as his mother, was like, what are you saying? What is this you want to do? And, but, I understand that it's a really long haul to get your PhD. Mm-hmm. And so he started a book business, online book business called Good Wagon Books. And actually part of the protocol was to donate to local charities. And so he was working on that. And he was also, I believe, and I'm not sure of the timeline, to be honest, working on a Bitcoin exchange to try to, this was all theoretical, at the time, because it didn't happen. And then a friend of his said, hey, I've got some startups happening out here in California. Why don't you come on out? I'd love to work with you on some stuff. And so he went out to San Francisco and roomed with Renee, and they were working on different things. And honestly, I don't remember exactly what they were. None of them really came to fruition. He also had started a video game, though. He had created a video game that was based on free market principles to give people, he wanted to give people the experience of what a free market was, not just talk about it, not just theoretical, but actually understand it by doing it. Mm-hmm. And when the video game didn't work, he turned to the internet.
Yeah, and
he created this website, which is, you said darknet market, and I always go, well, it was supposed to be a free market, it's like, but yeah, it obviously there were illegal things on it. So
yeah, well, people hear dark web, and everyone's mind goes essentially to nefarious things. But so essentially, he just created this platform where people could freely trade. There were restrictions on it.
There were, absolutely.
Where there was no child pornography, nothing stolen, right?
Correct. And anything that, it was all based on the non-aggression principle. Mm-hmm. So, and voluntary interaction. So no force was accepted. Anything that used force, anything that harmed a third party, like a child, or like someone who's been ripped off, or whatever, that was not allowed. It was all very much about really the libertarian philosophy of non-aggression.
How do we know, or is it known, I guess, how long Silk Road? Yeah, how long Silk Road was up? Because Ross created it. So when did it get created? Where about?
I think in 2011.
2011, and then when they took Ross down, is that when it went offline, or did it still stay up? Or
no? Well, actually, interesting enough, the forum still stayed up. And actually, when Ross was in prison, someone using the Dread Pirate Roberts account logged in, and Ross couldn't possibly be that person because he was in prison. And this all was discovered after trial. There were things at the trial, though, that indicated more than one Dread Pirate Roberts as well, and lots of anecdotal evidence. But in any case, this was pretty substantial hard evidence, but it was too late. And the forum stayed up, but then I think it went down, fairly soon after, like maybe a few weeks.
So one thing that I did want to talk to you about before we run out of time, and we have plenty of time left, but on that Babylon Bee podcast, you talked a little bit about your faith and about Ross's faith. So I wanted to talk about that and how that's helped you both to navigate this whole situation, this really tragic situation. So have you been a Christian your whole life, or is it something that's new? Or
I was raised a Christian, and then went off into New Age pursuits and spiritual pursuits. I've always believed in God. I was not a Christian when I was raising the kids. When neither was my husband, so we were not a Christian. We were not Christian then. But then I did become a Christian as an adult. And out of my becoming a Christian, eventually the rest of my family did as well, including Ross and our daughter, Callie. So, I became Christian as an adult. And for me, I realized all of the spiritual things I've been pursuing. I've been driving by churches my whole life, pursuing, and I realized I'm a Westerner. This is my path. I accepted Jesus, and it's changed my life. And I truly believe it's helped me get through this ordeal. I think that there is divine guidance here. I really do. That's my personal belief. We've made so much progress and been able to reach out to so many people and meet so many people, and doors have been opened. And so I remain optimistic that we will free Ross. And I mentioned on that interview, I had a moment. I was lying in bed early morning, kind of half awake. And I heard, not with my ears and not in my mind, but just I heard he will be free. And I was like, wow, he's going to be free. And that was years ago. So I've held on to that. And and also I really want that this Ross's case, and Ross wants this too, shines a spotlight on some of the things that we've discovered that are really wrong and so many people hurting, and helps make some changes. And that God will use Ross's case for that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's already happening. I think we're already seeing some of that. It's just, so Ross has been in prison for how many years now?
He's been. It'll be 7.
7.
Let me think of that. He's a 7th year. He went in November of 13, beginning of November of 13. So this November, and it'll be 20. So I guess that's 7 years. Or, some people say, no, that's 8 years. I'm completely, this is how bad I am at math.
I am too. You almost have to get a calendar out and count it off.
Yeah.
And then
long time.
They give you the sentences in months to make it even more confusing.
Yeah, but it's a long time, and so unnecessary. Ross wouldn't hurt a fly. And right now, what's really been hard is with the COVID thing. They've kept all the prisoners in their cell 22 hours a day for now since the middle of March. 22 hours a day in a cell. He gets out 2 hours to shower and make a call, and they've started 1 hour a week going outside in the yard. I mean,
what are the conditions like in the prison that he's in? Because I actually had on somebody that I interviewed while in prison. They were on a phone that they snuck in, and they were telling me the current conditions, and especially with COVID, how they were moving anyone who was showing symptoms or was positive or presumed to be positive into like a separate wing. And that's just the COVID. Then there's the overall, terrible ventilation in prison and different things like that happening. Has Ross shared with you anything about the conditions where he is?
As far as COVID, or just in general?
COVID and in general,
Well, where he is now is definitely an improvement from where he was before, because first of all, it's not violent. Even though it's a maximum, it's where they put people who are threatened with violence. So the people there are not violent. Ross isn't one really to complain about conditions, really, honestly. Mm-hmm. He doesn't complain much about anything. And so, he just kind of takes things as they come. So I don't really have a report on the conditions. Mm-hmm. I think, American prisons, even as bad as some of them are so much better than other countries in the world.
Very true.
I mean, he had a cellmate who was in a Thai prison that sounded like unbelievable nightmare. So it's like, look, it's not a country club at all, but it's, they generally get enough to eat, and they it's not comfortable. You wouldn't want to be there, but it's, as far as the virus, I haven't been super concerned because Ross is young and healthy. Mm-hmm. And I don't know for sure. They do put up the amount of cases. I don't think there's a lot, if any, now there. So I would just like him to be able to not be confined in a cell for 22 hours a day. And they're doing this out of caution, but it's just overkill, in my opinion.
Yeah, especially with the new research coming out about vitamin D, how essential that seems to be. With
good point. That's exactly what I was thinking.
So
he's not getting enough vitamin D.
But I did want to ask you about. I've heard you talk about how Ross. I don't know if this was after he was sentenced, when you talked about he saw 2 different paths that he could go down. Could you explain?
He writes about that.
Okay, he wrote about that.
Yeah. There's an essay, and it's on our website, and it's also on medium.com. And he writes about how after the sentence, he saw that there was two options, 2 paths that he would, he one was a total downward spiral into, demons of bitterness and despair and hatred and crushing sadness and all of that. All of those. I mean, if you can imagine getting a life without parole sentence, how you would feel. I mean, I myself, it was one of the worst, probably except for his trial day where he was convicted. It was the worst day of my life to have him get that. And it's like a death. It's a death sentence, only you're still alive. And so he saw that if how would he claw his way back out of that pit? And the other path, he felt like there was a path upward, but he couldn't find the steps. He just thought there was no reason to hope. It was over. And so he said that he just had to have faith that God would see him through, that was all he had. He was totally brought to his knees, and he thought, I've got to try to take the upward path, and I'm not strong enough on my own to keep out of that abyss that'll devour me. And so he writes, it's kind of interesting because Ross is a scientist. He was a physics guy. He worked in solar labs. He was majored that in undergrad and then material science. So he's very logical and wants proof of everything. And he said, it may be irrational to believe without proof, to have faith, but he's come to feel that it's also irrational to forsake the hope and the love and the joy that faith has brought him, because it's given him and me and our family the strength to fight and hopefully ultimately to win. And it's a desperate situation. And he says, keeping his faith alive is the difference between freedom and a slow cage death, where you're just sitting in that cage looking at the bars, or the wall. But if you have your faith, and he does meditate and pray regularly, you have freedom, even though you don't have physical freedom. You're not being eaten alive. There are guys in there that, they're in despair, they're bitter, and some of them have very good reason to be. And Ross he's chosen not to. And he's also applied many Christian principles, for instance, forgiveness, which is foundational to the Christian faith, to forgive others. It's very hard. I work on it myself a lot. And he's been quite an example for me, because he forgave the judge, this woman who gave him a death sentence, essentially, a walking death sentence. Yeah. And there was one time when I was just kind of ranting about her, and he's like, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to go down that path of how angry or anything. It's like, I wish her well. He even said that publicly.
Wow.
It's like he wants to be free of, he talks about the forgiveness thing, because he said, he was just, his mind would go crazy with all the people, the faces of the people, the prosecutors and the politicians and the judges and the federal agents and all those people who had put him in this cage. And he said it was so emotional. He just was angry and frustrated and helpless and hating them and all of that. And he just realized he had to stop it somehow, but he couldn't stop it. But he had to get a grip, right? Mm-hmm. And he realized, look, they're not sitting there tormented. They're not losing sleep over this. They're fine. They may, he doesn't know, but, he's the one that's suffering. And that's true of all of us when we don't forgive. And believe me, it's damn hard. And I don't succeed a lot of the time. But if we don't, then we're the ones, if someone said it's like eating poison and hope the other person dies. It's like they're not impacted. You are.
Yeah.
And so he said he just wasn't getting them back or doing any good by holding a grudge. He was just poisoning himself. And so he purposely cultivated thoughts that would help him forgive them.
Wow.
And even feel sorry for them for being so callous, for being so cruel, and focused on feelings of love and kindness, and just imagining him healing those who had hurt him, which is amazing. I mean,
amazing.
It is.
That's an amazing way. I love the way you put that there. It's like eating poison and hoping the other person suffers or dies. That's such a great way to put it, because it's the thoughts, the fears, everything. It's like you're reliving it again and taking it on yourself.
Right.
It doesn't make it easier
and that
to
bitterness
do,
eats away at you. No, I mean, because you want them to pay, and well, they may or they may not, And he said, it's not up to you though, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, he started being able to sleep, and as time went on, he just, as he was in the conversation with me, he would not allow those thoughts or any conversation that would go down that road. And he writes, he goes, hate does not hurt the hated, it hurts the hater. And so he said it's been years since he's wasted his energy on those people.
Wow.
And he's so much better off. That is a very strong Christian principle that, Jesus said, forgive your enemies. Talk about hard. It's so counterintuitive, and yet it's, you kind of got to do it.
It is and it isn't. I mean, it's counterintuitive on the surface level, but just like you were explaining there, once you start digging down, it is rational, I think, too.
Right, because you get a result. You get a good result.
Yeah.
And he also, in the same, I don't know if you want me to keep talking about this.
No, sure. Yeah, keep
going. Another couple of things he talks about, which are also Christian values, are acceptance, but mostly gratitude. And it's kind of like gratitude. He's grateful for what, his life, or grateful. And he said, look, you can suffer. There's all kinds of ways you can suffer in prison. Little ways, big ways. It's countless, constant, And I've noticed Ross won't, I'll be mad at some guard for being a jerk or whatever. And he's like, yeah, well, he's neurotic, or yeah, that's the way he is. Or yeah, he doesn't allow himself to get upset. He accepts it and then takes the next step and is grateful for things like, basically he says pain is inevitable in prison, but suffering is optional. So when you're suffering, you're feeding that pain, right? It's like holding on to it, nurturing it. And so he just is grateful. And he said, well, here I am, and I have clean water, and I have enough food. I'm alive. My family's alive. I have my health. I'm surviving. Thank you. Thank you for that. And so it's been a very wise path that he's taken that seems difficult. But again, like you were saying, it also is practical because he is emotionally and mentally healthy right now. It's not that it's hard what he's going through, especially now, but he most of the time doesn't let it get to him. And that, I don't know that I could say the same. I really don't. I don't know where I can't imagine.
Well, a lot of the time they say that a prison sentence is harder on a family than it is on the one who's incarcerated. I mean, I'm sure it's obviously different case by case, but it's not that it's easy on anyone. But
no, it's certainly true that the family is also serving time as the prisoner is. But I can get out in nature, and I can see friends, and I can, do a lot of things that Ross can't. And I'd rather not be. I mean, if I were going to pick one or the other, I'd take my path. I do think it's easier for me than being in a cage all the time.
That makes sense. I did want to ask you before I let you go. What's the status with appeals? Are there appeals left? I know that. There's the drive with the petition to get a pardon or a commutation or some form of clemency. But what are the options left on the table?
Well, we went all the way to the Supreme Court with two very important questions. One was a Fourth Amendment issue, which they punted, and the other was that Sixth Amendment issue I talked about, defending our rights to a jury trial, punted. So those cans are kicked down the road. Hopefully someday they will be corrected because they've been going on for decades. But in any case, so that exhausts your appeals in the court. You can't go on to do direct appeals. There is an option, a final Hail Mary called the 2255 or habeas petition. We are doing that. Unfortunately, it's also in the Southern District of New York, One benefit is that it would have been in front of the same judge who sentenced him, if you can believe that. But she retired, luckily, for everyone.
That's good.
Anyone who cares about justice, anyway. And so at least it's a different judge. I don't know her. But that's one thing that could give some relief. It depends how it all goes. The other is the clemency. That's the only other option you have is a commutation or a pardon. In his case, it would be a commutation by the President of the United States because it's a federal case. If it's a state case, it would be a governor.
Mm-hmm.
So, so the petition's asking for really a correction of a draconian sentence that really violates the Eighth Amendment of the Constitution, which prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. Very unusual sentence, very cruel. So it's saying this sets a terrible precedent. This is going to hurt other people going down the road, and it needs to be fixed. Please fix it, President Trump. Please fix it. And so that's what we're asking. And I don't know. I like I said, I'm hopeful. President Trump has shown, and I actually wrote an op-ed about it that was published in the Arizona paper, the Arizona Republic, I believe, that said, look, he has shown that he cares about clemency. He likes to let people out of prison.
Yep.
I mean, he's enjoyed that. I would certainly enjoy it. I would love it. I wish I could sit down and let people out all day long. Yeah. But, it's very moving when you see someone like Alice Johnson, who's in there for 22 years on a nonviolent drug. And by the way, who's also smeared with murder for hire, but not charged with it. Very commonly done, apparently. So I'm hopeful that if we can get the case in front of the president and he can see the injustice and what's been done, that he will add Ross to the list. I mean, and I believe having the petition, there's no automatic, I see journalists write, it's going to be submitted. No, it's really a PR tool that shows a movement. It shows that there's almost 300,000 people, way over 250,000 people, who thinks this is important and should be fixed. And as it grows, that does influence people. I mean, I've talked to legislators and others, and they're impressed. They're like, wow, really? They're surprised because it's so many.
Yeah, and honestly, probably a lot of them have never looked into the case. They just saw the headlines too. And
if you Google Ross, you get all that stuff. Yeah. And look, I'm sure obviously that you can't believe pretty much anything the media says. I mean, it's just,
you can't.
It's just, I'm constantly fighting with, please change this. This is wrong. And I prove it to them, and it's the whole thing. And some of them do, and some of them don't. Lately, there's an example. A very generous supporter bought a billboard on Times Square for Ross. It says free Ross, and then the website, very simple. And so this publication, Times Square Chronicle or something, wrote about it and said Silk Road was best known for child exploitation and human trafficking, neither of which was connected with it in any way. It was just completely false. And I wrote her and haven't heard a thing back. But yeah, so it's this kind of thing that they put up there, and then people read it and go, well, I guess that's true. You're reading it, It's
just, there's no honesty. There's no integrity. That's probably a better way to say it. No integrity in journalism. All they care about is the headline and the clicks. And there's no real,
and they're lazy. Yeah. It's very lazy. It's not really checking it out. It's.
No, it's pretty terrible. But, hopefully I'm optimistic.
Good.
I do this, this podcast every week, interviewing, not every week, but probably 3 out of 4 times a month is an interview with someone who's been through the prison system. And lately it's been just a constant stream of people, especially lately, people getting out compassionate release because of COVID. And my last 2 episodes before this were with 2 gentlemen who each did 26 years in prison for nonviolent drug offenses. And they're now free. But it's interesting, like...
a lot of time.
It's a tremendous amount of time. And their family stuck with them. His daughter was instrumental. Felix Walls, his daughter Allegra Walls, was instrumental in getting him out, stuck with him through the 26 years that he was in. Just incredible. Mm-hmm. But it's people don't know about this. People don't know that this problem exists outside of people who are passionate about it. So that's why I do this podcast, and that's why I wanted to have you back on to draw more attention to Ross's case. And if we could get maybe a celebrity or two to back it, or maybe
that'd be nice.
Maybe the new libertarian presidential candidate, Jo Jorgensen. Maybe I don't know. Has she spoken out about Ross's case? I don't know if I've seen it.
No, I should reach out. Yeah.
Yeah. So, when I publish this, I'll tag her in it to free Ross. But she's been very good so far with saying some very libertarian positions. So I'm hopeful that.
Good. Great. Glad to hear that. Yeah. I haven't been following it lately, so great.
Yeah, she's a good candidate, I think. But just before I let
you go. And as you may know, the Libertarian Party itself has did a motion for Trump to issue clemency to Ross. 46 state chairmen of the Libertarian Party have signed a letter that will go to the White House asking President to commute the sentence. And, we have support from the Libertarians. You guys are my people, and Ross's people. But they understand where Ross was coming from. They understand the motivation. They understand that. So they get it,
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But Lynn, want to thank you once again for giving your time, and
absolutely anytime.
I will send this to you when it publishes, and look forward to hearing you on other podcasts. And I'll tag that Babylon Bee podcast. People say podcasters shouldn't share other people's podcasts. I don't care. I mean, that was a great interview, so I'll share that around.
And they're great people. We're all on the same team.
Is there anything else you want to plug or bring people attention to before?
Well, there are other ways to help as well as the petition. Of course, sharing it. There's a Take Action page on our website with ideas. We always need donations because with the things I just mentioned we're involved with, I have lawyers. I've got like 3, I think, or 4. Their lawyers are super expensive. And then if anyone has any political connections, like you were talking about, it'd be great to, we have a widespread support page. You may have seen it, John. Get quotes from prominent people who, or support from them or letters from them would, really be helpful. So if anybody knows someone and bring their attention to it, put them in touch with me, that can really help. Makes a big difference.
Definitely. I will link to all that on the show notes page. And Lynn, thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Thank you, John. Anytime.
Okay. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that interview with Lynn Ulbricht. I have now for you Tyler Colford's song, AKA Crypto Man, Free Ross. Here we go.
Ross Ulbricht is serving 2 consecutive life sentences plus 40 years for creating a means for individuals to anonymously make online exchanges using Bitcoin. His actions did not create victims. For nothing more than creating a marketplace, the government locked him up and threw away the keys. Let's get Ross pardoned and get victimless crimes off of the books. Hashtag Free Ross. Free Ross. Free Ross. Free Ross.
Crazy. These are perilous times when they ruin your lives over victimless crimes, and they sever your ties from your business, loved ones, and family. Why? New slave labor, they barely pay you. Don't care about work ethic or major. In the prison system, the training criminals. Doesn't matter, public or private, difference is minimal. Get victimless crimes up off of the books. Yeah, and those who wrote the crimes are really the crooks. Decrease the population of the government slaves, and let those still in the system choose where to be caged. Cause a prison without prisoners will go belly up. And if no one wants to be there, it's probably corrupt. Look, no one in the right mind wants to be in those shoes. But if you had to go now, where would you choose, huh? John, where would you choose? Where would you choose? Land of the free or scapegoats and sheep? We spent 50,000 a year for each in the clink. I said land of the free or scapegoats and sheep? We spent 50,000 a year for each in the clink. It's restitution over persecution, that's the solution. But today's politicians make it more confusing. 3 felonies a day by the average person. Still wonder why there's an overpopulation in the prison system, persecuting crimes when there is no victim. Parents doing time, separating children, perpetuating crime to a future generation. Still the general perception, we are the freest nation. And if you believe that, I got a kingdom for sale that make you prove your innocence and assume your guilt. Held until convicted unless you make bail. That's the type of nonsense to make a nation will.
He's a first-time offender, no violence at all. The government used warrantless surveillance, and 98% of people in this country do a plea deal. They're bullied and threatened by prosecutors. That is basically how our system works. Everybody should be concerned about what's going on in our criminal justice system. How can you call this correctional? It's a criminal training program.
All right, there you have it. Hashtag Free Ross by Crypto Man, also known as Tyler Colford. You heard a little piece there, a little audio part by Lyn Ulbricht mixed into that song. Just fantastic. You can find it on Spotify. You can also buy it on Amazon. I'm going to link to it on the show notes page where you can buy it on Amazon. And let's finish up our interview, the rest of our interview, hearing from Tyler Colford, what motivated him to write this song, and why does he care so much about criminal justice reform? All right, so here we are back with Tyler Colford, and hopefully you guys enjoyed that interview with Lyn Ulbricht, and hopefully you've gone to sign the petition to free Ross, and I'll put all the links on the show notes page for the petition, where to donate to the cause, and obviously where to purchase Tyler's song to support his work as an artist. And I'm back here with Tyler again, and I wanted to dig a little bit more into Ross's case. And one aspect of it that I didn't really talk about with Lynn today, but I've heard it talked about in the past on other podcast. Maybe I've speculated about it myself. I can't remember, but I'm looking at your opinion on this, Tyler.
All right.
What do you think about the role of Bitcoin in this? A lot of people think, and there's a famous in the one documentary that Chuck Schumer, basically, points out he's saying that basically Bitcoin should be illegal, and just cut and dry. This is bad stuff. It's used by bad people. It's used on the for nefarious transactions. Blah blah blah.
Yeah.
What do you think? Do you think that the reason Ross, or one of the reasons why Ross has been punished so harshly, is because of the Bitcoin element to this?
It's definitely a possibility. I mean, everything that was happening then, like Bitcoin was really just jumping off. I remember listening to Free Talk Live, and like the price of it was like, I think it was under $10 a coin. Mm-hmm. So it was like just barely starting to like a couple stores using it in New Hampshire. But other than that, like it was just starting. It had potential to grow, and maybe the government saw that, and he was used as an example. I'm not sure, but it definitely seems like there's a possibility there. I'm not going to give a definitive answer, though.
Yeah, all we can do is speculate. That's what we do here on Lions of Liberty. Yeah. We just wildly speculate. But I mean, the elements of the case that really rubbed me the wrong way, aside from the judge just hammering him harder than really any sort of comparable case out there. I mean, even if you look at the other characters in this case, I think the creator of Silk Road 2 got something like 8 years in prison. The 2 federal agents who were stealing Bitcoin and got convicted of corruption, which was not allowed to be brought up at the trial, their involvement in the case and them doing that, they each only got 6 years in prison. I'm sure they won't serve even half of that.
Right. They're probably out now.
Yeah, they might be. I'm not even sure. But what are your thoughts on that? I mean, those elements of the case.
That just adds credence to him being used as example to be like, if you mess around with this, like, we're going to come after you. Mm-hmm. You know, they have the monopoly on currency right now. They have like so much financial aid going to all sorts of different countries and stuff, all in the form of petrodollars. Like, it's the dollar, and I just feel like the biggest threat to their power right now is the power of the dollar.
So you're saying maybe the
he
biggest,
was used as
the
an
biggest threat
example.
is Bitcoin, because Bitcoin was a threat
exactly.
to the dollar.
Yes. And if he was the first one to go down, then that definitely adds a lot of credence to.
Yeah, but it's interesting. Like, if you were to, maybe I'm wrong, but the impression I get, if you were to go out like on the street somewhere, and I guess you couldn't do it now because you can't really talk to people on the street because of COVID. Everyone's wearing a mask. But say you could, and you go out there, you know, man on the street with a camera and a microphone, and you start asking people, what do you know about Ross Ulbricht, Silk Road? I would guess that half the people probably wouldn't know who Ross Ulbricht was. You know, maybe of those half who do know, probably 75% would probably, the first thing they would say is, well, he was trying to kill people. He was, it was murder for hire, which has been, I mean, those charges were never brought. The ones in Maryland were dropped. The guy who allegedly was the target of this murder for hire says Ross had no part in it. And a lot of people don't know this. DPR, who Dread Pirate Roberts, who, the head of Silk Road, who Ross was acting as the creator, there were thought to be multiple of them, and there were federal agents acting as DPR, and even after Ross was in prison, someone logged in as DPR. So the whole thing is just such a cluster, and he can't even get an appeal. I mean,
it is, yeah. I have been bringing it up at work and stuff, and for the most part, like, no one has even really heard of Ross Ulbricht. Like, they might have heard of the Silk Road, and that's about the extent of their knowledge of anything. They probably, like, 9 times out of 10 haven't even heard, like, known that it was taken down and these cases were brought upon, like, everyone involved or whatever. But, like, they just heard of the Silk Road. They didn't hear Ross Ulbricht, and then I talk about it, and they're like, "What?" Like, when I mentioned, like, the agents that were caught embezzling, like, they're like, "That's so messed up," and since no one's heard of, like, the alleged murder, attempted murders or what have you, like, I don't really have to go into that issue, even though it's been debunked. And right, the guy who was, like, the target, or allegedly the target, he's, like, in favor of pardoning or finding clemency for Ross, right? I believe so. So, I mean, that just makes everything even more, like, ridiculous.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I do like, with you creating a song, and I think libertarians need to do more of this. And I think there are more libertarians starting to do this, where you're coming at it from a cultural angle. And the song the song itself isn't only. It's not. I mean, it's about really criminal justice reform as a whole. I mean, you can speak to that if you want to talk about, like, the song and, like, what the underlying message there.
Oh, well, I mean, really, I have a couple articles that I wrote about, like, actually, I think it's just one article. It took so long to write, but about like prison reform, because like the biggest issue that like the left has is that they're private prisons, quote unquote, like, but there's stocks owned by like congressmen and judges and stuff, and it's like it's like the Federal Reserve. It's private, but it's not. It just works in the whole system. But I feel like the mission statement of prisons are what's really like lacking. Like I'm all for privatizing everything, so when it comes to that, I just feel like the prison can change its mission statement. Instead of just being like holding prisoners, it could also have a dual effect with like the homeless situation. Be like, yeah, we can house you, and they're really like providing towards like a livable area, instead of just like prison cells and what have you. Like it could be more of like an apartment building. It wouldn't look like a prison complex. The people in there would probably be more like less apt to try and escape, which I hear about people trying to escape all the time. I hear about people not having adequate bedding or sheets, and just the terrible living, like flooded floors and all sorts of stuff.
Toilets that won't flush, just overflowing.
Exactly.
Disgusting.
It's disgusting, and those are all quasi privatized prisons. I mean, there's public prisons too, and really there's no difference, public or private, with these prisons. It's all about punishing the person. If they're dangerous, then they can these systems are used to like keep people away from the public community, really. Like if they're a danger to the public, and like a murderer or a rapist or something like that, but they get housing. And then the whole system or the mission statement should be on retribution. So there has to be a victim with it, because if it's based on retribution, then they have to pay back the victim. So there has to be a victim involved. If there's no victim, then there's no crime. And then in that case, like half the prisoners wouldn't be in prison, really. But at any rate, so they would be set up by like Amazon and Walmart type things, that they need people to stock shelves or whatever, and not like storefront shelves, but like warehouses and stuff. So they'd be away from the public. They'd be able to like do some sort of production work,
add some value,
and add value, and that production work would be used for the retribution of the victim. After the retribution's paid off, they can find like some sort of an insurance to where this person's rehabilitated, and they can like safely enter the community once again. If something happens, then that insurance company will have to take the brunt of the chart or the retribution. But then in that case, like that person has to show an insurance company. It could be multiple insurance companies that give this kind of policy out, but they have to prove to one of them that they are actually safe to be within the community. And if they aren't, then they can either be sent out to another community, or they can work to pay their room and board.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many options out there. And I mean, the first thing you take out of the prison system, like you said, all the nonviolent offenders, and you're just looking at people who've committed fraud, right? You could use something like you're talking about, where they go in and they're working to pay off their retribution. Once that's done, then they can go back into society, and their insurance they would pay probably wouldn't be that much because they've righted that wrong. They're not really. I guess they could be a threat to commit fraud again, but the same thing would just happen once again. But we talk about like violent offenders and things like that. That's when we get a little bit more complicated. I would think on that end about how do you let them back into society. But that already happens today, and it happens today even under the current circumstances where there is no really correctional system. They're thrown in and thrown to the wolves in prison, and still a lot of violent criminals come out and do not commit another crime. Some do, but
and they're also put in with other people who don't have like the same views as them. Like they're forced within like different types of gangs and stuff, like the Aryans and MS-13 or whatever. Like there's different factions, and they're all forced in close quarters with one another, whereas in like this, my version of the privatized prisons would be, instead of everybody like coming together like within a clique like you see in schools and stuff, the preps and the jocks and blah blah blah, instead of having like them forming gangs like Aryans and whatnot, then you'll have people who are resonating towards certain types of smaller privatized prisons that can actually serve the prisoners adequately with like bedding and hospitality and stuff, but they're also within a targeted trade that they would all have like they'd have an interest in. So it'd be like if they're interested in biology or something like that, they could actually do work in that field, get paid for it, or pay retribution for it, and they're with other like-minded individuals. And I feel like that would decrease the retaliation and the conflict within the prison systems as well. And they'd be smaller and more able for fulfillment, like to fulfill their duties, what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, Tyler, I just want to thank you for coming on the show, and I do want to get those links from you for the articles that you referenced.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm gonna run for state senate again as an independent instead of a GOP. But yeah, so I have a website. It's tylercolford.com. And all my articles are there. I'll send them to you, though.
Well, Tyler, thank you for coming on the show. It was great to get to speak with you. And I think it's always a good thing when we're shining a light on such an injustice as the case of Ross Ulbricht.
For sure, I definitely agree. Thank you, John.
All right, man. Thank you. All right, guys. Hope you enjoyed today's episode of Felony Friday. With that said, I don't know much else to say. If you like this and if you want to produce your own episode, please consider joining the Lions of Liberty Pride at patreon.com/Lions of Liberty. You can become a Nittany member for $50 a month, or if you don't want to do all that, you can join for as little as $5 a month to get our bonus content, perks, merchandise, all the good stuff. Check it out, patreon.com/Lions of Liberty. From myself, from my co-producer today, Tyler Colford, thank you for listening. Always remember to keep your head up and the fires of liberty burning.